Welcome to the Aquarimax audio show with Russ and Kelly. We provide information on all kinds of aquarium-related topics.
This is episode 152, recorded February 23rd, 2013.
Greetings, Aquarimaxers. We have a special show for you today. We have an interview with Diana Walstad, noted aquarium author of Ecology of the Planted Aquarium, which is now in the third edition. So, welcome, Diana.
I'm glad to be
here. We're so glad
here.
to have you on the show. Well, do you want to start out with the first question?
And this is something we like to ask all of our interviewees because it's always interesting to us and to our listeners to hear how everybody started in the hobby. So tell us a little bit about how you first started out with aquariums.
That's a great question. It was as a child. I must have been 8 or 10. My mom had a fish pond. I started keeping live bearers. I think I started out maybe with mosquito fish, which I used to catch in the canals, and this was in California. And I had a little 2-gallon bowl and kept swordtails, mollies, and guppies at one time or another. I remember being absolutely fascinated when they gave birth, and all those little swordtail babies, bright red, they were so cute. Yeah. And then when the black mollies had babies, the little black babies, they were adorable. I just couldn't get enough.
That is a neat experience.
I started out with live bearers as well, and I remember the same fascination with the little babies. The morning I was yelling at the top of my lungs with the little baby guppies.
Excited.
Yeah, I remember watching them pop out of the mother. I was just absolutely entranced.
Pretty magical.
Magical is right.
So did you keep on with aquariums up to now, more or less?
Or there were some interruptions when I was in college, but I kept coming back to them. At one time, these guppies that I had, they had a horrible disease that I couldn't get rid of. And I remember being out of the hobby for many years because of that. And then I started back up in 1987 with the planted tanks. But I've had tanks off and on all of my life.
And I guess this is a good lead into our next question. What led you to develop your method, or what is widely known as the Walstad method?
Well, I'll go back to my childhood here. I lived next to a dairy farm, and they had a big stock tank in the yard with the cows, and it was filled with Vallisneria. This stock tank, it was a big 100-gallon stock tank, was out in full sun. The substrate was probably manure from the cows, cow. But the plants in there, the Vallisneria, it was like a forest. They were bright green, emerald green. There was no algae in there. They were growing like crazy. It was just a beautiful sight out in the middle of this feedlot. So that kind of gave me, something that I always returned to when I was having trouble growing plants later on as an aquarium hobbyist. For a long time, I tried to grow plants in the aquarium, and I did what everybody recommended, put gravel in and get your plants. And I failed all the time. It just never worked. And so when I got back into the hobby in 1987, this was after my sister died, and I needed something to divert my attention to. I decided that I would just do something really different, and I kept that idea of the stock tank with that beautiful growth of Vallisneria in my mind. And I thought, well, none of the aquarium methods have worked. Why don't I just do what I knew, what I had seen before? So I set up a 20-gallon in front of the window with sunlight, and then I just put soil in the bottom, and I couldn't believe it. The plants just grew like crazy. I'd never seen plants grow like that in an aquarium. And that's kind of how it all started.
Oh, so in this first attempt of the method, you didn't have any gravel over the soil or anything?
Yes, I did have gravel over the soil.
Okay.
Yeah, yes, absolutely.
Okay. And
that's very cool.
So
where the inspiration came from.
And it's pretty amazing that the first attempt at the method worked right off.
I got lucky. It was like night and day from what I had remembered in my earlier failures. It was, once you see plants really growing, it was just spectacular.
Yeah.
Cool.
So that was and it was just a game changer.
Well, yeah.
I can imagine. Yeah, that's a fascinating story. That the method was inspired by the stock tank. I'd never heard of that. That's
yes, you're the first one to hear this.
See, we've got the exclusive scoop.
Yeah, but you heard it first on Aquarimax, gentlemen.
Yeah.
Wow. So that leads us to our next one too, doesn't it?
Yeah. Tell us how the Walstad method compares with the Highlight CO2 injection planted aquarium.
All right. Well, it's just such a big difference. I mean, I'm working with Mother Nature, whereas those methods, they're very expensive to set up. They're hard to maintain. They require a lot of work because you're working against Mother Nature. You're removing nutrients with a whole bunch of water changes and excessive filtration, and then because there aren't any nutrients there, you have to put them all back using gadgets, artificial fertilization, CO2 injection. And my method, it leaves the nutrients in the tanks and lets the plants have them, and that keeps the fish healthy, and it's just a completely different method.
Well, it's very cool. You could almost call it the organic aquarium.
A very good term. Thank you. Yes, that's it. It's the organic aquarium. The soil is a tremendous supply of carbon dioxide, and so, instead of injecting it in with a tank and an injector, you put soil in there, and the decomposition in the soil produces the CO2. I mean, the soil can produce a lot of CO2.
Neat.
And it can produce it for a long, long period, can't it?
Yes, especially in the beginning. The first 6 months to a year, it will produce a lot, and you'll see really robust growth, plant growth during that time. But as the years go on, a lot of the organic matter has been decomposed, and the plant growth will slow down. And
so
you'll get what?
Do you replace the soil?
No, I don't. No, I just leave it in there.
Okay.
For a year. I've got tanks that are 5-10 years old.
Wow.
So they work just fine. They've just slowed down in terms of the growth rate.
Yeah, what happens as the tank evolves is that the plants that are more robust and are more able to get the CO2, they will predominate in the tank. So you'll get some of the species that do well in the beginning, especially the Rotalia, the red plants, and Ludwigia, a lot of the stem plants, they just can't compete with an Amazon sword plant or a Cryptocorini in getting carbon dioxide from the water. So they will tend to go. And what you end up with is the more robust species that are better able to get the CO2 that's there.
Okay, that makes sense.
So it's kind of a plant succession.
Right, that's what I was just thinking. Along the lines of a natural system, like you were saying, it follows the same pattern of nature
that you would find out in the wild,
like in a pond, for example. The succession.
Yes, we're going back to the organic idea, which I like.
There are probably a lot of parallels we could draw there. It's fun.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps I will give a plug for the high-tech tanks, in that if you want to keep a lot of plant species, especially the difficult ones, and the stem plants, the carpet plants, then that's the way to go. Because with the high-tech tank, you're providing enough CO2 that you can keep all these plants that aren't so good at getting it. And you can have a wider variety of plants. So the people that do aquascaping, where you see all those different plant species that are rather difficult to grow, when they're faced to compete with the more robust species. You just have more variety of plants in a high-tech tank.
Right.
Okay.
So another way to say that might be that the Walstad method is not another way to get the same results as a high-tech tank. It's a different approach for a different result.
Yes, I would agree with that.
Okay. So it might be possible to start out with a Walstad tank, and then as the CO2 levels are depleted from the soil, to start supplementing CO2 in the tank and then keep some of those other plants and essentially turn the tank into a high-tech tank.
Yes, that's perfectly possible.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the CO2 injection is the key.
And I've done CO2 injection. I've done some low-tech tanks, and I think I may have mentioned to you before, I did a shrimp bowl based on your article.
Okay.
A really small one. I was experimenting with a half gallon, which I know is not the same size as the ones that you did, but it worked quite well.
That's great.
Yeah.
In the kitchen window, yeah?
It's in the kitchen window. A lot of fun. Only one shrimp because it was so small, but it seemed to do all the things you talked about. I saw a succession in terms of micro creatures in there, little seed shrimp and so on. And it was
how it's such an easy way to get into the hobby, a little shrimp tank.
Right.
Yeah.
I loved that article. I thought that was great.
Oh, I'm so glad.
And one of our listeners, in fact, he read it and posted the link up on our, or asked us to post the link up on our site, and we've done that as well. The link to your
great.
page that has that article.
Oh, that's great. They're a lot of fun. I mean, and it hardly cost a dime.
Right.
Yeah.
It was very cheap, and I had some of the soil that you recommended on hand for our garden. It was the exact same brand, and I used old gravel.
Very convenient.
Yeah.
So it really didn't cost anything. I pulled some pelly out of another tank and a shrimp out of another tank, and
voila.
Yep.
That's great. That's wonderful.
So one thing I think that fascinates a lot of our listeners, I know Tony would love this question because he's wondered about this, and many others, is the role of water changes and filtration in a Walstad tank.
I don't think they're very important. The water changes, I don't see really a point in it that much because the plants are pulling nutrients and salts out of the water rather than doing it via a water change. So if you've got robust plant growth, the plants are taking up the excess nutrients and the toxins and the excess salts, and when you prune the plants, you're in essence removing those nutrients from the water. So I'm not big on water changes. I mean, I do the little bit now. I like to remove the surface scum I would say every month. I'll remove about 10% of the water just to get off that surface scum.
Okay. And that scum tends to have a lot of proteins and lipids in it, so that makes sense that you'd be another method of nutrient export along with removing the plant mass with the pruning.
Yes, I like to hear you talk about lipids. Very good. That's wonderful. Yeah, a lot of the nutrients are on the surface, and the reason I really have become obsessed about keeping a scum off is that the mycobacteria that cause the fish TB,
right,
they tend to collect at the surface. So I like to get that surface scum off the tank.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I read about that in your other article about mycobacteriosis, and
yes,
been very careful with the surface scum too. That's
right. The mycobacteria they gravitate towards those lipids that float on the surface, and it's just a good way of keeping the mycobacteria population down by getting rid of that scum.
Right.
And then the filtration, that's also not very essential. I just mainly keep it to circulate the water, but I keep submerged filters in my big tanks, but the little ones don't have any filtration. The water should circulate in some way. That way you distribute heat, oxygen, whatever in the water. So I keep filters in the tanks, but they're really not. It's mainly to circulate the water.
Keep the water circulating. So what types of filters do you usually use?
I use the internal filters I like the quick filter. It's a little cylinder that you can put in padding that's very has small pores in it, and I just reuse that padding over and over again. Sometimes I haven't used any filters. I've just had a pump to circulate water, and that works okay. And I have 2 little shrimp tanks. They're both 2 gallons. I don't even have filters in those. I just have air bubbles gently bubbling to circulate the water. So I would say minimal filtration.
I think this kind of sounds like the holy grail of fish keeping. Everybody always wants to, I don't want to do water changes. I don't want to worry about filters. So this sounds awesome.
Well, it is. It's pretty cool. Yeah.
Neat.
It is. It's a fascinating way to approach it.
Well, I kind of like the filters now that I have, because those pads that I have in them, they get clogged up with gunk, which is it's basically bacterial growth, and the bacterial growth reflects the nutrients. They take up nutrients from the water, just like the plants as they grow. So I like to keep the filters pretty. Every month I'll remove that padding and squeeze out all the gunk. And that, in a way, removes nutrients from the tank as well.
So there are at least 3 methods of nutrient export.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Without doing water changes. Yeah.
Good. Well, you mentioned shrimp tanks. Can you tell us about plants and other animals that are particularly suited to the Walstad method?
Yes. Well, the fish that I like for the big tanks are the rainbows. There's some fish I would avoid. The main problem I see is that people buying fish that are going to get too big for the tank, like Oscars, goldfish, arowanas, plecostomus. They're all going to get, really huge. And goldfish dig up plants. The Malawi cichlids, if they don't kill each other, they'll dig up the plants. I mean, there's just a lot of problems with those fish. And, I feel that there's so many nice fish, gouramis, angelfish, there's so many nice fish. Why waste time on fish that are going to create problems?
Right.
Yeah, and everybody has their own preferences on that, but it makes sense that, especially in a nicely planted tank, you don't want big, aggressive fish that are going to
rip it up,
steamroll all of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So you found that angelfish do well in a Walstad tank, then?
Actually, I haven't kept any angelfish, and they'll work fine. I mean, there's no reason why they wouldn't. I've also corresponded with people that keep discus in one of the natural tank, and they do fine. I don't see any reason why it wouldn't work.
Yeah, it makes sense that if discus are doing well in it, that angelfish would. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I don't see any reason why.
Neat.
I wouldn't keep something like a darter. These are native fish that really need oxygenated water, kind of the river fish.
Right.
That really, I basically like to keep lake fish. There's less water movement. They've adjusted to, probably a little higher CO2 level and less oxygen than, say, some of these very rare plecostomus that you find in fast-moving stream. I've tried that, and they don't do very well.
Right, that makes sense.
Yeah. I would keep lake-type fish, not river fish that are used to, lots of oxygen and
a lot of high turnover and movement.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
It's really not fair to the fish.
Right.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Some of your favorites are rainbow fish?
Yes, I just like them. I don't have to deal with babies, and they're beautiful, and they work very nice in a 50-gallon tank.
Right. We had a school of dwarf neon rainbows in our 55. We actually started with a breeding trio, and they ended up giving us about 16 babies.
Oh.
And those grew up, and we had a nice school in there, but then we had problems with mycobacteriosis.
Which is how you found her article.
Which is how I found your article.
Oh, really?
So
wonderful.
now I think we have everything under control, but more or less in that tank we haven't had issues with that for a long time. But we only have one of those rainbows left.
Okay.
And it's sad, but...
well, they're very susceptible to mycobacteria.
Right. That's what I found out in your article. So I found one of your solutions was the UV.
Oh, yes.
The UV sterilizer.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend that. The filters that I have, I don't have the UV hooked up right now, but in the past, these were the little Submariner filters with the UV sterilizer in them.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was going to ask you about that at one point, which brand you use, so that makes sense.
Yeah, they're internal filters that have a UV light inside. They're very nice. They're very nice filters, frankly, even without the UV light.
I'll have to look into that one because I don't want to have any more outbreaks.
We'll get you one for your birthday. How about that?
There you go.
Yeah, they're about $70.
Okay, yeah, that's not
bad. When you're talking, these people that get valuable fish like discus or even the rainbows, they can be fairly expensive. Mm-hmm. I would invest in a UV filter. It's a huge help because it just kills all the bacteria in the water, so that the fish, they just have a much better chance, not just against mycobacteria, but all other fish diseases.
Right, any kind of pathogen in the water, basically.
Yes.
Okay, well, I'm sure that many of our listeners would like a lot more information about the method, as would we, beyond what we can cover in our podcast. So could you tell us a little bit about what they can expect to find if they get a copy of your book?
Well, a whole lot of information. Probably more than most people want to see. It has a lot of, I distilled information from hundreds of scientific papers on how plants take up nutrients from the water, how they prefer ammonia over nitrates. Mm-hmm. So you can use plants instead of filtration to remove ammonia. It talks about how, if you're using a soil substrate, how the first 6 weeks there will maybe potential problems that you need to address, whereas afterwards the soil settles down. So, and my book shows the chaos and describes it in the soil that is freshly submerged. I talk about algae control, ways to fight algae growth. There's many different methods. Why having a soil substrate will help with algae control. See how plants take up nutrients, how fish food provides nutrients for plants, and how fish food provides all nutrients for plants. Let's see, table of contents. The aerial advantage, why plants that come above the water surface, why they grow so much faster when they have access to air. Mainly it's because they get their CO2 from the air, which makes them grow much, much, much faster than submerged plants. And that ties in with all the efforts now to encourage wetland plants. That's because they grow 4 to 5 times faster than submerged plants. Then my last chapter is on, how my method, how it's set up. And the big discovery I had in the last few years is a siesta method. That is that I turn the lights off 4 hours during the noon to 4 p.m. And that's kind of the latest thing, which is really working nicely. I did some CO2 measurements, which it's in my book, but it shows that the plants take up all the CO2 by, say, 11 a.m. in the morning. So if you leave the lights on all day, the plants have a lot of light, but they don't have any carbon dioxide. So if you turn the lights off for 4 hours in the midday, I showed, and it's in the book, that during that time the CO2 regenerates because you have this bacterial metabolism that's producing CO2 during that time. So then when you turn the lights on at 4 p.m., the plants, now they have CO2 and light, so they can they can grow.
That's so cool.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so that's in the latest third edition and some of the later printings. It saves electricity. It keeps the tank from overheating. It's better for plants. It probably helps with algae control because during those 4 hours from noon to 4 p.m., there's very little CO2 in the tank, but there's lots of light if you have the lights on. And algae is much more adept at getting carbon dioxide than plants. So during that time, you're actually favoring algae growth.
That does make sense. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
It does. And I've heard of people refer to a blackout period for algae control, but the way you explain it as the siesta method makes a lot of sense.
Because it's a cooler name.
It is a better name.
the siesta.
It also makes sense that it's directly benefiting the plants, so it's giving a disadvantage to the algae, but it's also helping the plants outcompete them. So
yes,
your explanation is the best I've ever heard.
Great. And then my book goes into plants as water purifiers, and it shows how they take up heavy metals, how they take up ammonia, and I have the scientific studies to back it up.
Mm-hmm.
Talks about nitrite toxicity. Then I have a chapter on allelopathy, which is kind of cool. This is where plants secrete or they release chemicals into the water that inhibit algae, and there's kind of a warfare between plants where they're trying to gain supremacy, so they produce these allelochemicals. It's a little bit advanced, and it's not too well proven, so I won't belabor that point. But it's an interesting concept of how plants, they kind of fight. They can't run and hide from predators. So what they do is they produce chemicals that will keep them from being eaten. And those chemicals are released into the water, and they interact with algae and invertebrates and whatnot. So it's just an interesting concept.
Right.
Very interesting.
I read something about that with, for example, I think it's hornwort, Ceratophyllum, that has been said to release some of those allelochemicals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a kind of a general phenomenon of all plants. Like the big examples are black walnuts and eucalyptus. They release so many chemicals that it's very hard for plants to grow nearby them. They poison their competitors. That's what it is. But in an aquarium, you have this closed system where the water, it's not like a river where you're getting, fresh water all the time. So you have this closed system, and the plants are releasing these chemicals into the water, and you'll just get some interesting interactions that may be hard to explain. I mean, some plants may not grow well because they're being inhibited by other plants in the tank.
Right. Mm-hmm. It sounds like very similar to what happens in a reef tank with chemical warfare that occurs among corals.
Yes. I've heard that can be very dramatic.
Yeah.
Be the next Pixar movie.
Well, we'd like to get a link to your book's website on our website for the podcast page, but we'd also, if it's a website that you'd like to just share with us right now too, you could just tell us, and our listeners could maybe go there as they're listening.
Okay. Well, let's see. Probably the easiest way to get to my website is just to type in dwalstad.com.
Okay.
I have a blog there now. It's for all of my writings, but the one for the aquariums, you can get to the aquarium website via that general website. Mm-hmm. The reason I would suggest people go there is that there's the article on shrimp. keeping the little shrimp tanks, and then there's the other one on mycobacteria.
Mm-hmm.
It's easier to go to dwalstad.com.
That's fine. They can do that, and they can find it from there.
Right.
Yeah.
We'll put the long one up on our website.
Okay. Thank you.
No worries.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just for one last question, and we know you probably talk about this in your book too, but tell us just a little bit about how to best achieve the balance between artificial and natural light in the Walstad method.
Oh, that's a great question. I would downplay the natural light a little bit. I mean, if you have it, use it because it's free. Mm-hmm. But I use mainly artificial light now.
Oh, okay.
I mean, my tanks are near windows, but so what? In the past, I wrote about putting windows in my home in order to accommodate my tanks, and I'm no longer doing that.
Yeah, that's kind of expensive.
Yeah, I think artificial lighting will work just fine. I mean, if you have, window light, that's fine, but I don't think there's any point in trying to belabor the point.
Okay. That's great.
Yeah.
Do you have any other questions, Russ?
Well, I probably have about 100, but I know we're running out of time. So thank you for coming. This has been fascinating, and we've enjoyed it a lot.
And I have to say, I've really enjoyed talking to you because you seem like just a really sweet, gentle, kind person, and I like you.
Well, Kelly, I thank you very much. I've really enjoyed this interview. Sound like you're doing a nice job of furthering the hobby. I think that's great.
Well, thank you.
And yeah.
Maybe someday we could have you come back on the show and do one about mycobacteriosis.
Oh,
that'd be good.
Oh, that would be good. I'm writing an article about tuberculosis in humans right now, so I'll have plenty to talk about.
Yeah, I found it. I'm sad about the fact that I've had to deal with it in my tanks at some points, but I'm really grateful for the information that I found that you've provided. The best information I found has been information that you have put out there. So,
thank you. I hope. Yeah, I think it was important, and that's why I wrote it, because I think a lot of hobbyists get turned off because when their fish start dying.
Right.
And it's a big problem in the hobby when people buy their first fish and it's sick and dying. So that article was to address that problem.
Right, exactly.
Very good.
Thank you, Diana, for joining us. We're really grateful that you accommodated us with this interview.
It was wonderful.
It was a great one.
It was my pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this edition of the Aquarimax audio show. For additional episodes, please visit aquarimax.com. For comments and/or questions that may be featured on an upcoming podcast, leave a message at 801-477-0629 or email us at info@aquarimax.com.